Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate just people being interested to learn about Israel and to learn about missions, to learn about what God's doing around the world. And I love sharing about Israel and just, everything that's been going on. So I'll be sharing a little bit more, but first I want to introduce my family. So, of course, that's me in the upper left, and then that's my wife, Jessica, and then my son, Cameron, on the bottom. He's making like an L-shaped, I don't know, sign with his hand there. And then our daughter, so he's 7, and then our daughter Ella, who is 4, is there on the right. So this was actually taken during a Palm Sunday service, which over in Israel among the Arabs, Palm Sunday is like the big day of the year. So, here it's kind of like Easter is like the bigger day, but over there, I don't know the whole history behind it, but Palm Sunday comes around, everybody dresses up big, and you walk around in a circle singing songs, and you have these candles that's just part of the tradition. So that was the day that we got our picture taken. So it's just an introduction to my family. I'll go ahead and just pray for our time. And I just want to also thank the church as well so much for inviting me. You guys have supported our family for 9 years now. It's been very valuable support, and we just love your partnership in inviting us me here today. So, all right, Lord, we just thank you for this time, and I just pray that you would guide us and that you would reveal to us just more about this country. Of course, that we read about so much in the Bible, the history, incredible things that you did through this people and through this country, and also what you're doing today, and how we can be involved in prayer and be more aware of what's going on. And I also pray your blessing on this church here, that you would use them and guide them. May they be your witnesses in this community and around the world. And may this church be active in making disciples, Lord, for all who come in and fulfilling your great commission, Lord, of making disciples around the world. And pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so just a little bit about our family. So I'm from Sacramento. My wife is from San Mateo, so we're Northern California local. I actually grew up in the Natomas area. So this is my dad right here in the blue hat. It's actually a Star of David hat, and the Israel. And then actually my longtime friends as well, Jim and Jan, and then also Martin and Francis, also from Sacramento area, a long time. Join me here today. And so my wife and I actually met in Sacramento at a church called The Gathering. It doesn't exist anymore. And so we met in 2004, and we were just friends for 7 years. We had no interest in each other romantically, just, hey, how are you, And then just something happened, clicked with her first. She liked me, and then about a year after that, I started to like her. So she was putting feelers out. Then I started to think, I think she's putting feelers out. And then eventually I started to like her. So it was one of those things. And then at the same time, God actually led us to Israel with OM, which is a missions organization that works all around the world. So it's one of those stories where God leads a couple together into a mission at the same time. And that's exactly what happened to us. And I've seen this so much in OM and other places. And so we've actually been in Israel now for 10 years. We actually got married right after we got to the field. And we were planning to get married when we got there. So that wasn't a surprise. But we got it there September 2013, and we got married April 2014. And then we served with Operation Mobilization, which I mentioned. We just call simply OM. So OM is in about 150 countries now, with about over 5,000 people, full-time laborers. That our mission statement is we want to see vibrant communities of Jesus followers amongst the least reached. So we're wanting to see groups of believers being started. And a lot of times around the world, and especially in least reached places where the gospel isn't going in, there are very few believers. And really this takes the form of small house churches that meet in houses or other locations, because in these parts of the world it's often very difficult to even meet out in the open. Or you're in places where people, I'll share in the Muslim ministry, even to be seen with somebody like us, just kind of talking about the Bible can be seen as, you're worried about what your neighbors think, right? You're worried about what your family thinks. So a lot of times it's, this type of environment that really allows people to get into the Word. So we actually live in Nazareth. Nazareth is the largest Arab city in Israel. It's called the Arab capital of Israel. Probably about 120,000 people. So we've lived there for 9 years. Been in 4 different houses now. We've been in this one we're now in Rainey's been there for 5.5 years. It's just a great place. And so I'll be sharing more about that in terms of the Arab work there. So my role, I'm actually leading the OM team in Israel. So that's my main role. Right now, including kids, we have about 95 people, about 54 adults and 41 kids around there. So it is quite a big team. So that takes up a lot of my time, is all of the running and admin and help, leading the team leaders and the different, talking with the area leadership, international leadership. And so that's definitely my biggest focus, which I really love. And then I also still have a personal ministry in the Muslim villages. And so there's actually 13 Muslim villages that were focused on south of Nazareth in the Jezreel Valley, which is also known as the Valley of Armageddon, you read about. So before that, Revelation 16 happens. We're there ministering to the people. And these 13 Muslim villages, no believers at all, completely unreached. And this has kind of been my heartbeat for a long time, is to go into places like that, kind of pioneering ministry. And so we go in and we just meet people, share the gospel, try to find people that are spiritually interested that we can follow up with later on. And again, I'll get more into that. But those are kind of the two things that I'm involved in personally. My wife is the personnel officer for our team, so she deals a lot with the admin roles, with anything to do with personnel, kind of like an HR role. And then she's also a guide at Nazareth Village. Nazareth Village is a very cool place that actually recreates the Nazareth of Jesus' time. Because when people think of Nazareth and they go to Nazareth today, they think of the Nazareth of 2,000 years ago, and that's what they want to see. But of course, now it's a modern city, so it doesn't look anything like 2,000 years ago. But Nazareth Village, you can actually go to. It's a recreated place where you can actually see what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago, what Joseph would have been doing, what Jesus would have been doing, what the synagogue would have looked like in the town. And so it gives you that. And it's run by believers, and our focus is on the message of Jesus and why he came. Not necessarily is this the exact place where this happened, but it's about sharing the gospel, which is the most important part of Jesus in his life. And so so Jess is the guide there. It's a wonderful ministry. If you ever get over to Israel, I encourage you to visit that place. And she also has a ministry with Muslim women. So over the years, my wife has been befriending more and more Muslim women, becoming a part of their lives, just being a light in their lives. And so that's been encouraging to see. And our kids, so my son is 7 and our daughter is 4. And they were both born in Nazareth. And actually my daughter, this is her first time in America. She's 4.5, so this was a special trip for us to actually, first time ever as a family to be in America. Their parents' ancestral homeland, basically, to go back to where their parents are from and to see what America's like, and to meet meet my family. A lot of my family's never even met her. And so they are, just part of the local community. They speak Arabic. They go to local Arab schools. And the teachers say that they understand pretty much like the other kids, and they're on the same track. So that's been encouraging to see. And they kind of see themselves as little Arabs, but at the same time, they know that mom and dad are not from there, that they're American. So they're beginning to piece that whole bit as they get older, what that means. But they really enjoy living there. They see that as home. They really love their schools. So that's been encouraging for us to see, just being there, that our kids are doing very well. So one of the things that I've, being in Israel for 10 years now and sharing about Israel, one of the things that I like to share about the most is just how complex Israel actually is. And a lot of people have a very simplistic view of the country. So some think that only Jews live there, and all the Arabs live in the West Bank, for instance, or Gaza. It's actually much more complicated than that. And even within the Jewish people, within the Arab people, there's a lot of differences. And you have all these groups, they're pretty much all fighting with each other. It's a very chaotic situation, and the current situation now is the most chaotic I've ever seen, where you have the Jewish religious and secular kind of fighting with each other, especially within the government, and there are different agendas. And then the Jewish-Arab conflict is still very much alive, still problems there. And also now in the West Bank and Jenin, the recent Israeli military operation that happened. And I'll share a little bit about Jenin, because we actually ministered. My dad was there in that refugee camp with me, where everything was going down, and we ministered with a family there that were very much praying for and hoping that God would lead them in salvation during this time. So one of the things I'd like to do this morning is really explain more about what Israel is like today. And really in Israel you have 5 distinct main groups of people. And you have the Jewish secular population, which is the biggest still. Definitely the biggest still by far in terms of the actual group. So they're 60% of the population. And then you have the Jewish religious, which is about 20% of the population. So the Jewish people, and also there are some foreigners that married into Israelis and encapsulates that too. About 80% of the population. And the Arabs are about 20% of the population. And so you have 17% of the country is Arab Muslim. Arab Christian, just 1.5%, and Arab Druze, about 1.5%.
What is Judaism? Like, Druze, like it start with D.
Yeah, so the Druze it's a religion that came out of Islam 1,000 years ago. So I'll be sharing about that too at the end. So I'm going to go into detail about all 5 of these groups. Yeah, this is a kind of a Muslim offshoot. And when we talk about Arab Christian, most of these are not believers. Most of these are Greek Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholic, and Catholic background. Most of them have never heard the gospel. It's just a historical thing for them. They don't even go to their own churches. But I'll get into, but in terms of actual believers in Israel, we believe there's somewhere around maybe 35,000 believers in Israel today that actually know the Lord, that are following Jesus. Maybe about 30 to 35,000 on the Jewish side, and maybe about 5,000 on the Arab side. So it's still a very, very small percentage of the community of the entire country that actually know the Lord. And there's always there's a debate about exactly how much, especially on the Jewish side, but usually it's somewhere between like 25,000 and 35,000. But on the Russian background side is where you're seeing the biggest growth. The Jews that came from the former Soviet Union, so coming from Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Moldova, places like that. But still, I mean, 35,000 people is still very small.
Do they still have to hide their belief of Jesus?
So most of the time, no. But there are situations where if they've converted out of a religious family, or Muslim family, then they definitely, usually not violence, but they usually are cut off or they have to stay separate. But we are seeing increased persecution, which I'll get to from the religious side. So this gives you a snapshot of what the country's like. So still, Jewish secular is still by far the biggest group in the country, but the religious, because they have so many kids, they're now growing and becoming a bigger part. So that secular part is actually getting lower every single year. 60 now, it'll be 59, 58, 57. At some point in the not too distant future, that'll be under 50%. So you see that with the government now, which is a much more religious government than what you've seen in the past. Yeah. So I want to start off with the Jewish secular population. So this is a picture in Tel Aviv, which is definitely their center and their hub. Oh, is that good? Okay. Kind of the center of the Jewish secular life. So one of the largest pride parades, for instance, in the world happens in Tel Aviv. They're very much into any kind of secular idea. So about 75% of the Jewish population in Israel would identify as secular. And they're usually very secular. So about 50% claim to be atheistic. They don't believe in God at all. And they tend to be very, very strong about that. My dad does a lot of work in the kibbutzes, in the kibbutzim, as we say in Hebrew. And especially in the kibbutzes, which, they started out 100 years ago as very socialistic, communistic communities where they would work off of the land. And with communism, which was atheistic from its origin, that was just very infused into those communities. And so you'll meet a lot of people there that will say, yeah, we don't believe in God at all. And in the secular mindset, Tel Aviv is the center of their culture. In the secular mindset, they view the Bible as kind of their historic kind of fairy tales type thing. Like the Norse religion or the Greek gods. Kind of like these are stories. Some of it is true. For instance, the kings that lived, or King David, they've now proven he actually existed in many ways in Israel. And a lot of these kings existed, but in terms of, parting the Red Sea or some of these miracles, that never happened. That was just added in to make things more colorful. So they still observe the Sabbath, as Shabbat, as we say in Hebrew, which starts sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. So that's still the day off in Israel, is the Sabbath. And they would also observe the religious festivals as cultural. So Passover is huge festival there. And so the Passover Seder, the Passover meal, usually the secular would observe that along with the religious. But the secular would do it in terms of a cultural thing. that they're still very proud usually to be Jewish and to identify as Jewish, and they would celebrate the Passover as a historical thing. But they wouldn't believe that God parted the Red Sea. They might not believe that a lot of these things actually happened. Maybe they didn't even come out of Egypt. But they would still observe them. And they would also observe Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Weeks. Those are the three big festivals mentioned in the Old Testament that everybody had to attend, right? And so that's actually, everybody has those days off. That's still very much a part of Israeli society, whether you're secular or religious. And that's a big difference between secular Jews here in America versus secular Jews in Israel, whereas secular Jews in America usually wouldn't observe any of this stuff, because that's not part of our country here. That's not part of the social fabric. But in Israel, they would actually observe all of that, but from a secular point of view, if that makes sense. And they're also much more tolerant of Christians than the religious Jewish population, much more so. So we usually don't have any problems at all with the secular population, when we do evangelism, when we share with them. And actually, they're actually quite open to talking about spiritual things. I think this is the next part. Okay, I'll mention that at the end, yeah. So at the bottom there, they tend to believe people should be able to live how they want. So their view, for instance, is of Jewish people that believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They see it as weird, definitely, like you as a Jew being a Christian, believing in Jesus Messiah. But hey, if that's what makes you happy, if that's what floats your boat, more power to you. That's the main thing in life, is that you are happy, and you do what makes you happy. And so if that means believing in Jesus, and that is what does it for you, then that's great. So that tends to be their attitude. So they tend to not be anti-you, anti-Christianity, but at the same time, they wouldn't like the exclusiveness of, you need to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah in order to be saved, in order to be right with God. So that's just kind of the mindset that I think a lot of you understand as well with secular population here as well. They tend to have a very, very negative view of the ultra-Orthodox population, which is the most strict religious Jewish population. So those are the ones that wear the black hats and they have the long curly cues here on the sides. The Hasidic population you see in Brooklyn, it's the same type of order. They're very, very strict. So the Israeli public has a very, very negative view of them. There's a couple reasons, big reasons. One big sore spot is that the ultra-Orthodox, even up until now, they're working on this, have not served in the military. Whereas in Israel, you're required, both men and women are required to serve in the military once you get to 18, generally. And there's ways to defer that or do public service, but generally everybody serves. But the religious population has been exempt. And so there's that feeling that, you guys are exempt, you're not sacrificing like we are. So that's also part of the negative. And so they've been, the secular population has been trying to get the religious to actually serve. And there's been some bills that have been trying to be passed. My dad was mentioning one actually trying to get them to serve. But it's quite difficult because they keep getting back into the government and stopping these bills. Another thing about it is that the ultra-Orthodox population is actually largely subsidized by the government. So the government actually pays for them, their expenses. They actually pay for these brand new neighborhoods that get built. And so why this is the case is that when Israel was founded in 1948, this was right after the Holocaust, the religious population was actually very small. And the people who started the modern state of Israel, these were all very, very secular people. Most of them were atheists. Some of them came from, socialist background. So the religious didn't have any power at all. But they saw the religious population as still kind of like the keepers of the Jewish culture and the Jewish religious history, because they knew the Torah, they knew the Talmud, they knew the rabbinic tradition. So they still saw them as valuable. So they kind of viewed them as like the Levite class, where they get to pay, the government will pay them to continue the study of the Torah, to keep that tradition alive. And they also don't need to serve in the military as well, because they're just focused on studying. And in these yeshivas and stuff, that's what they do all day long, is they just study. And they study the Torah, and they study all the different rabbinic works, and they keep that alive. So when they're only 3-4% of the population, then that works. But now they're 13% of the population, just the ultra-Orthodox. So it's like, okay, in terms of finding other people to pay for this becomes harder and harder, So this is a So these two things are one of the reasons why the secular population views the ultra-Orthodox very negatively. And my dad will tell you as well, I mean, just some of the things they say, yeah, it just makes me want to throw up whenever I see them. I mean, these are some of the comments that you hear from the secular. But there's definitely a very big clash between those two. Now, with the Jewish secular, it's not too hard to get into spiritual conversations with them, actually. They're usually quite opinionated about these topics. Israelis are usually quite opinionated about any kind of topic. So when you get into any discussion, they're usually very free with telling you what they think, what others think. Not just a Jewish thing, but also an Arab thing as well. So it actually is not hard for us when we go out and we share our faith to get into spiritual conversations. But believing in the biblical Jesus for both the Jewish and the Muslim side is so very difficult. And on the Jewish side, the identity issue, I would say on the Muslim side too, is very important, the idea that what it means to be Jewish. And within the Jewish DNA and mindset, how they think, to be Jewish and to believe in Jesus or to be a Christian is completely like a paradox. Like if you were to believe in Jesus, you're no longer Jewish. And so it's like an impossibility. And so, like they're mutually exclusive. And so it's that identity issue that a lot of times it just stops right there. It's like, yeah, but I'm Jewish. Like I can't be a Christian. This is who I am. This is my faith. This is my identity. So that's usually one of the harder things. But they have all different ideas about religion and about whatever they believe. So that's the Jewish secular population. So what I'm going to do with each of the 5 groups is tell a story, actually, that we've encountered that gives you some background. And one is this guy Smolik. This is the guy that my dad actually met at this kibbutz. It's actually right next to Nazareth. And Smolik is a guy about my dad. He's like mid-70s, I think. So he's about my dad's age.
About my age.
Yeah. And so Smolik is a guy that from the beginning said, yeah, I'm secular, don't believe in God, just a Jewish guy. And so my dad began to share with him, this was like maybe 6 years ago, we met him first when you walked in there. And so he would go through, very few of them know who Jesus really is. They've never read the New Testament. And so when you ask them, so this is stuff they're all learning for the first time. So my dad would share with them about Jesus from the New Testament, talk to them about different spiritual things. And so then he left, and then there's a 4-year gap between when my dad came back. It was like 1.5 years ago. So we decided to go back to this kibbutz. So we were trying to find him, and we couldn't find him. We met a guy there, said, I have his phone number. We tried to call him, and he said, yeah, he's away or something. We tried to get back. So we said, okay, we want to actually talk to somebody here before we go. So I said, we're going to just walk through the neighborhood and see if we can find other people outside. And that's what we do, is we just find people on the street, outside their house, and we just ask them, we just start having a conversation with them, get into spiritual topics. And so we were going down, it's a small community, so we went down to the very end, and then I saw a street on my right, and I said, okay, we're going to go down this street, and if we haven't found anybody at the end of the street, we're just going to go back. So we get down to the very last house on the street, and there's this guy outside of his house. And he starts speaking to us in English, and he had lived in Australia and stuff, but he was born in Israel. So he got into this, one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life, maybe the most interesting person. It's hard to describe. So he actually grew up in a religious family, totally turned his back on that. He said, I don't like that at all. Totally secular now. He described himself as atheist. He says that he worships science. Science is the main thing. So we were talking to him about how God created science. Science shows the glory of God, And so he had heard a lot of things. So this guy's name was
Yaron.
Yaron. Yeah. And so at the end of that time, we had shared things with him that he had never heard before, and that's oftentimes what we're able to do. Is plant a nugget of wisdom into them, or a nugget of the truth that they've never heard about before, that gets them thinking out of their paradigm that they live in. And a lot of times you only have 15, 20 minutes to share with somebody before they have to go on. And you can, as long as you leave them with something that gets them thinking about, maybe what I believe isn't true, or maybe there's something else out there, or maybe what they said about, maybe I need to learn more about who Jesus really is. I mean, if he's claiming to be the only way, and he is, then I really need to know that. So a lot of times that's what we do. So with Yaron, he was clearly impacted, and we left him with a lot of things. And at the end of that time, he said a very interesting comment. He says, if Jesus is real, would he love a sinner like me? Basically, like, I'm such a bad person, he could never love me. And we said that's why he came, is because he loves you. So a lot of times it gets to the core of, most people who claim to be atheists aren't atheists. They're people who are either angry with God, or they've been burned by religion, and so they just say, I don't believe in God, the whole thing's nonsense, I want nothing to do with it. But once you get down to the core of their past and how they feel about things and what happened, a lot of times you can begin to see healing and you can begin to see people open up. And so, yeah.
Yaron had a very particular odd thing in his life where he listened to the evangelical Christian hymns all the time. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art,
Oh, yeah, I
The
loved
Old
him, yeah.
Rugged Cross.
Yeah.
He loved these. He said, I listened to them all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, he loved the music. He's very into music, but he didn't want to believe in the message, you know. And so it was an amazing encounter. We said, yeah, like maybe, you know, we were like, okay, we weren't meant to meet Smolik today, but we met Yaron and it was an amazing time. And we gave him a New Testament at the end in Hebrew. And we said, you know, read for yourself. Let's just tell everybody, read for yourself about Jesus. Don't just listen, you know, to what other people have said, what your rabbi has said. You find out for yourself. You're the one that's responsible for your own life and responsible before God. And so there have been some people that have told us they have been reading it. And so we left. It was a very powerful encounter. So we're walking back to our car, and we meet Smolik, the guy that we had initially. He was like walking up the street. And so we're like, oh my gosh, you know. And so we just said, Smolik, I'm so glad that we met you. We've been wanting to see you again. And he was happy to see us. And then he said, you know, he's like, I'm an atheist, but I want you to pray for my daughter. So I began thinking to myself, like, are you really an atheist then? And if you really are an atheist, if you don't think, if God doesn't exist and your prayer doesn't matter, why do you want us to pray? But that's actually what he said. He says, you know, I'm an atheist, but I want you to pray for my daughter. She has cancer, you know, and not knowing what's going to happen to her. And so we said, okay, let's pray right now. So we both prayed. He had his eyes closed, bowed down, right in the middle of his kibbutz, you know. And so you see these openings with people who come from a very hard anti-Christian background. But you see these openings as you go out and just be a witness, just say, God, use me. You'll see these things come up, you know. And so anyways, that's kind of a story of what we often see with the secular population. They come from this particular background, but there are openings that happen up, you know, that come up and that happen. And so these are some of the encouraging things that we've seen. We have seen some other secular Jews come to faith as well, that have actually accepted Christ and that are in some of our small groups. These are just some of the stories my dad and I have personally seen. So now we get on to the Jewish religious.
John, do you baptize these people or not?
Yeah, our team has been a part of baptizing them, yeah. That we see come to faith. This is a picture of some ultra-Orthodox at the Western Wall there. So the Western Wall is the holiest site in Judaism, which was the retaining wall for King Herod's temple that he expanded, the second temple. And so whenever, my dad comes, we go down to the Western Wall first thing and try to talk to people. We pray, have some great conversations down there. So this is, very typical what they look like. They have the black hats, they have the black outfit. A lot of times you'll see like the fur hats. And most of these groups originally come from Eastern Europe. And so that's what they wore. They have cold winters, so they would wear these fur hats. And so that's why they still have that today, even moving into Jerusalem. So that's where those come from. It wasn't just some guy that said, hey, let's have our group wear some fur hat. That looks kind of weird. It's just a historical thing that these groups started in the 1700s, 1800s. And so around here, it's written around half are from the ultra-Orthodox population. This is the Jewish religious. It's about 65%, I would say. A little bit more than half of Jewish religious are from the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox are not a monolithic group of people. They're actually divided into many different orders, headed by certain rabbis. So I think in Jerusalem alone, there's at least 19 different ultra-Orthodox religious orders. They each have their own rabbi. They each have their own theology. Some are very anti-Zionist. Some are very kind of in the middle. Some are, they have different views on different things depending upon their rabbi. And they have different clothes, different things that they wear. So they don't all believe the same thing, but they are very strict in their religious practice. The rabbis are the leaders of the community. The people are loyal to the rabbi over the state. And so the people see their main allegiance to their faith and to their rabbi. And you saw this during COVID very, very evidently, because whenever the government would come out with a new restriction, regulation, the people would wait to hear from their rabbi if it was okay to actually obey it before they would obey it. So then if the rabbi said, okay, it's okay, then they would obey it. But if the rabbi said, no, for instance, we're not going to shut down the yeshiva because we need to study, then they wouldn't do that. So that's also a big difference between them and the secular population. Some actually Orthodox groups, and actually most ultra-Orthodox groups are actually not Zionist groups. A lot of people are surprised to hear this. So they were not in favor of the modern Jewish state being born. And the reason is because because the modern Jewish state was started as a secular state. And they believe that only the Messiah can rebirth Israel. And the Messiah has not come yet. So some groups, yeah.
Something.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So some groups are actually very anti-Zionist, and they'll preach against the state of Israel, and they'll even go to like countries like Iran. They'll partner with Palestinian groups, and they'll actually be, kind of promoting an anti-Israel agenda. But most of the ultra-Orthodox groups are like in the middle, to where they don't support the secular state, but they want to take advantage of the system to further advance their cause. And so they just kind of go along to get along type thing.
Sorry,
You have a question?
Can you just explain what is Zionism?
So Zionism believes that the land of Israel, the land belongs to the Jewish people. And so that's their land, God gave it to them, and so that's theirs to have. So that essentially that's what Zionism is. And that's, especially in the late 1800s when the Zionist movement started, coming back to Israel when the Ottoman Empire controlled it, that was the idea with that. This is our land. And to escape persecution of the European countries where they came from, they decided we have to be in control of our own destiny. We have to have our own country where we're in control of ourselves, because as long as we're a minority in these countries that are very anti-Semitic, then we're always going to be persecuted and we're never going to get out of this kind of trap we've been in. And then, of course, the Holocaust happened as well in Europe, which further cemented that idea that, yes, we need to have our own country, and Israel is the land that belongs to us. So the ultra-Orthodox would believe that, yes, the land belongs to the Jewish people, but they don't believe in the modern state. Which I think that's something to specify. But they believe that it needs to happen when the Messiah comes. The Orthodox have very high birth rates. They have on average about 7 kids per family, whereas the secular have 2 kids per family. So if you do the math, what happens over time? The Orthodox become a bigger share of the population. That's what you're seeing happen. And that's the reason why the current government is the most religious yet that we've seen in the agendas that they're promoting. I don't know if I have it. Okay. Yeah, so a good example is the current government that came in. The 2 main ultra-Orthodox parties said, here's an agenda item for us, that on Shabbat, no electricity in the country. All the electricity stations are shut down. Nobody has electricity, no homes, businesses, nobody. Because that's what they believe Sabbath observance involves, is you don't use electricity. That's considered work. And so the rest of the country is like, no, we're going to have electricity on. We're going to be running businesses. And so they said, so I don't think that they actually thought that would pass. They just more wanted to put their agenda forward to see kind of what they could do. But they have a very strict view of the Sabbath. You see this in Jesus' day. They were trying to constantly judge Jesus by their own rules of what the Sabbath meant. So they said, yeah, healing on the Sabbath is work. Jesus said that's nonsense. It's not work. That's something that came from you, not from God. Or, eating the kernels, or also the Sabbath day walk. They actually the Pharisees came up with how many walks is in the Sabbath. And so if you go above that, then that's considered work. Today, it's much worse. There's now been 2,000 years to come up with additional rules of what work involves. So they believe that so they believe if you make a call, that's considered work, but if you receive a call, that's not considered work. So they actually have Shabbat phones. They call them Shabbat phones, where they're actually phones where on the Sabbath you cannot make a call, like you can only receive. So you can't accidentally. So just the idea of, and the whole thing about mixing meat and cheese, which is not biblically kosher, but today in Israel it's modern kosher. That comes from don't boil a goat in its baby goat in its mother's milk. And so the idea is the fence around the fence around the fence. So in order to keep you from getting inside this fence, you build another fence around it, and then another fence. I mean, why not another fence around that? Because that could get you from the second fence, which is from the first fence. But then what happens is people start to declare this as being from God. All these different fences and rules and regulations. And again, we saw this in Jesus' day, where he fought against this. Today as well. So anyway, I was talking about that because as the ultra-Orthodox get higher in their population, they want to impose, their religious standards on the population. So they want to segregate men and women on buses. So secular women are like, no, I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus and, on airplanes. And sometimes on the airplanes this happens. They'll actually say, okay, women, you got to sit over here because this guy doesn't want you next to him. And this happens like in El Al and some of these other flights. I've heard these stories. So you can see the tension between the two groups, completely different visions of where they want the country to go. Theocracy versus a secular, just kind of, democracy. The Jewish religious are very antagonistic towards anything they perceive as missionary activity, and they will very easily physically assault and threaten you. I don't care if you're a kid, I don't care if you're a woman, man, doesn't matter your age. If they see you as attempting to do missionary activity in their community, they will likely beat you up, throw you out, especially in some of these neighborhoods.
Going back to this step,
Did I go back home?
did I get it wrong that there's a segregation against women among that very religious group?
Yeah, so among the ultra-Orthodox, there's a big segregation between men and women. So that's why at the Western Wall, the men have their section, and the women have their section. For those of you that have been to Israel, you've seen that. And they've tried to start this egalitarian section that the secular have been pushing, but the ultra-Orthodox have been fighting against that. But in their society, it's very much segregated. And most of the religious roles only men can have. So they're the only ones that can be in the yeshivas and be rabbis. But in the Reform Judaism, women can be, that's the secular portion, they can be rabbis and things like that. But among the ultra-Orthodox, yeah, it's still very segregated.
There is my son and I met a young lady at the Aviv, at the Afula Hospital. We were praying for a family of Jews. She heard this prayer. And so I asked her, can we pray for you in some way? And she says, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen or heard in my life. And I said, well, what is it about the prayer? She says, you're talking about the consuming fire of Yeshua. The consuming fire. I've never heard of that. I said, that's what he is. Yeshua is a consuming fire. It burns away the sin, the ugliness in our life, and new growth happens. I said, that's what he does. And she kept repeating that phrase. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen or heard in my life. We offered her a New Testament. She said, now she's the wife of an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. Okay? She said, if I take that New Testament home, my husband will take me to an empty lot and cut my head off. That's exactly, the ultra-Orthodox can be as ugly against women as the Muslim. Every bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of abuse that happens in the community, and there's a lot of just like things that. But it's a very, very close community that even a lot of times the police don't go into. It's kind of like a no-go zone in a way, and so a lot of this stuff just kind of continues on. But yeah, so we've seen this on our team. I would say the majority of our team has either been beat up, punched, chased, or somehow harassed by the ultra-Orthodox for some type of ministry activity. And sometimes, we're in their community, but sometimes they'll actually meet us even outside of their community. And I remember a story of, we had a group that was in Jerusalem, a summer team, and so they were actually not in an ultra-Orthodox area. They were doing tracting, they were passing out tracts, and they had like a bag of tracts, like a couple bags. And this ultra-Orthodox guy came up to them and knew what they were doing, and he grabbed one of the bags from them, and he started yelling to everybody, missionaries, missionaries, these are missionaries. And then he looked at, everybody stopped them, that sort of thing, because he was trying to get people riled up against us. And I wasn't there, but it was the rest of my team, a lot of the other people on the team. And so he also started telling people on the team, he says, I'm going to kill you. He says, you're a missionary, I'm going to kill you. And he started threatening them. And so he started to get more and more, when he started taking stuff from people. Very interesting, there was an intern that was with us for 3 months at that time. She was on this team. She was from Modesto. She was this really small girl, maybe 4'11", something like that. She was in college. And sweet as can be, And so anyways, she had like a backpack. And he reached to grab to take her backpack away from her. And she looked him square in the eye and says, you will stop it right now. You will not take my backpack. And he just backed up like that. And then he just started walking on his own way and left. It was just something came over her that scared, that just It just like intimidated this guy, and he ended up leaving. But that was the thing, they're missionaries. I'm going to kill you. We're going to kill you. In their mind, we're soul stealers. We're trying to come into the Jewish community and steal their souls, convert them to this false religion. We're trying to destroy their culture. And we're Christians who are the enemies of the Jewish people. We're the people that killed their people in the Holocaust. We're the people that did the Inquisition and kicked their people out of England and Spain and all these other countries in the Middle Ages. And so that's their mindset. And so that's why when they see you coming in, it's like we're kind of with a spiritual machine gun. And so they're trying to stop us. And so that's the mindset that you have. So that's why I tell people, it's like, you go in with a thing of tracts, it's like, they're not going to read it. They're just going to throw it away. And you're probably going to get beat up. And I kind of remember Jesus saying, don't cast pearls before swine. Why? Because they're just going to trample you. They're not going to appreciate the pearls. They're just going to go right over you. So you have to be careful with a lot of these things if people are not going to accept it. So because of that, like, I don't do tracting in Orthodox communities. But, however, even though they're very close communities and they usually live in their own communities, it is possible to have spiritual conversations with them. And I'll get to a story very soon about that. But if you're nice to them and you just come up and want to get to know more about them, they're usually actually quite open to having some conversations. And a lot of times they only speak Hebrew or Yiddish. But if you know Hebrew or if they know some English, then you can actually have conversations with them. But because they're very closed, most are actually coming to faith through the internet where they have anonymity. So even having, like my dad said, giving somebody a New Testament, if it's found in their house, then they can be in some serious trouble. But on the internet, they're able to view things that they can then turn off the browser or whatever, and maybe nobody else in the house knows what it is that they've been looking at. So most of the stories we hear have actually been them searching online and having that anonymity. So it's a pretty tough community. Now, the other 35% or so of the religious community in Israel are religious Zionists or they're other religious observant. So religious Zionists, they believe in the God of the Bible, they believe in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, they're religiously observant, but they're very strong Zionists. They believe that the land belongs to the Jews and that we need to establish a government now, a Jewish government. And so they're very strong, they're very pro-Israel, and they link the land with the religion. The religious Zionist societies, they're more open than the ultra-Orthodox. Sometimes they live in their own kibbutzim, but they mingle with the rest of the population a lot more, have jobs in the community, things like that. Usually serve in the military, I would say, and get jobs. But they're still hostile to missionaries and Jewish believers, and they're also willing to get violent like the ultra-Orthodox. Some of the stories that have been in the news, there was this Isaiah 62 fast that went on for a while, led by IHOP in Kansas City. There was a group at the Western Wall, and some religious Zionists and ultra-Orthodox came and tried to cause problems, and tried to intimidate them, beat them up, that sort of thing. And the believers who were there, they just, they were protecting themselves but not fighting back to show, and a lot of even the top Sephardic rabbi in Israel, that's the Middle Eastern background Jewish, he actually issued an apology about that. He said, yeah, this is not who we are. So they were even impressed with how the believers responded, that we're not going to play the same game of getting violent with you, but that we're here to show the love of Yeshua. And then so besides the religious Zionists,
Oh, what do they think about America? They just must think we're awful.
The religious Zionist or
Everybody over in it.
Yeah, it's complicated. I don't even know how to answer that question. I mean, a lot of Israelis know that America is an ally, and so there's, I would say, a more positive view of America, but because of just...
See our TV shows?
Mainly the movies, not like the news, but the movies are still quite popular, So in terms of the Jewish religious, I want to tell the story of Menachem. So by Nazareth, which is an Arab community, I saw this brand new community being built, and it looked very nice. And so I began to see these Jewish people in religious dress, like going to the bus stop and everything. And I began to realize, wow, this is actually an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood being built right next to Nazareth. So I said, I want to actually go in there someday and meet the people. And so when my dad came a year and a half ago, we actually went in there, tried to talk to some people, didn't really get anywhere. So then I had this idea. I said, they have this park here. Next time my dad comes, I want to actually take my son Cameron to the park as a way of like, hey, we're just playing, and then maybe some things will open up. And so we did that in March. My son was there, he was playing in the park, and we were talking to a few people, and then all of a sudden this one guy is talking to my dad, and he sends another guy over, and it's this guy Menachem. So he knows a lot better English, and he definitely knew English better than Hebrew. So Arabic is the main language I speak there, but I'm also learning Hebrew somewhat. And so Menachem comes over, and he's dressed up in the whole religious outfit, and he's like 22, only had 2 kids, so he's just starting out. And so anyways, he was talking to us in English, wanted to know why we were there. And my dad very quickly gets on to the fact that he is, a Messianic Jew, and his mother was a Jew, but he believes in Yeshua. And so anyways, the guy's like, that's interesting. He tells us, Menachem, he says, yeah, I don't know anything about Yeshua because he's not part of our curriculum that we're taught. So it's kind of like I only follow what the curriculum says. He's not a part of it, so therefore I don't know anything about him, because I asked him, have you read the New Testament that was written by people that knew him, that were his disciples, that actually witnessed these events? That's a key thing to actually read about if you want to get to know somebody. And he says, no, we're never taught that at all. And that's really the mindset, is that they're taught, both on the Jewish and on the religious and the secular side, is they're taught not to have anything to do with them. Don't learn about them, don't read about them. So they've reinterpreted verses like Isaiah 52 and 53, that's not referring to a man, that's referring to the nation of Israel. So they reinterpret these things, or they actually tell people, don't read these messianic verses because you're not educated, you don't have the education like we do, and have the authority like we do to properly understand these verses. And so therefore you're going to get in trouble, because especially with Christians that try to tell you that this points to Jesus. Very similar to the old kind of Catholic idea that the priests are the only ones qualified to read the Bible. That's why the Bible was banned in the Middle Ages. You couldn't even have a Bible of your own because you weren't qualified enough to actually understand it and read it, and it could be dangerous. So it's very similar in the Jewish world, that the rabbis are the ones that can fully understand this stuff, and so it kind of keeps people away from reading the Bible. And so that's what he did. And so we had a very good conversation. We just shared some stuff about Jesus. He was somewhat hostile. But at the end, remember I told you sometimes you only have 15, 20 minutes with somebody to actually share with them. So what do you leave with them during that time? And so I left him with, just learn for yourself about who Jesus is, because you're responsible before God. So, at least learn for yourself. Ask God who Jesus really is. And that's something that all of us can do. And so my prayer is that when I left with him, we actually offered him a New Testament. He turned it away. He says, that's very offensive. Don't offer that to me. And but our prayer is that even that small thing of, we're also praying that God would visit him divinely to show that, hey, these 2 guys that he met randomly in his neighborhood, they were from him. So there was something about them, And that's often what we see in Israel is that's the furthest that we can get with some of these people before we're chased out. Because I saw people looking at us at that time. I told my dad, I said, we need to leave, because once they kind of see us as infiltrating, then they can start to crowd around us and that sort of thing. And that was all the time that we had with Menachem. But we've planted a seed, so let's pray that those seeds grow. And we hear stories about these small seeds growing into salvation among these people. Okay, so now we get to the Arab-Muslim sector. Very different. So now we're into the Arab part. Again, best 17% of the population. These are some Arab Muslim guys with some kids. I don't know who these people are. This was a picture I got from our team, so I don't know the background here. They're smoking on like a shisha pipe, basically. It's very popular. So the Muslims in Israel, they're very similar in beliefs to other Muslims in the Middle East. You're not really going to find much difference between a Muslim in Jordan or Lebanon or Iraq or Saudi Arabia. They're Sunni Muslims, have the very Muslim beliefs about the Quran, about Muhammad, all of that. Muslims coming to faith can receive persecution from their family and community, but violence is not common. So in some Muslim countries, you'll hear about Muslims that get killed because they convert to Christianity. In Israel, I've never heard of that, and part of that is because the government is not a Muslim government that condones that. So when I was living in Egypt, I was there for 2 years with OM. You'd hear these stories of them, like in Upper Egypt, a Muslim crowd would go to a church and burn it down, and and then the government would say, this is horrible, we're going to find the perpetrators, and nothing ever happens, because they're sympathetic to, it's a Muslim government, they're sympathetic to the Muslim population. But in Israel, there's not a Muslim government, so they know that if they were actually to kill somebody, they would get arrested and put in jail. The government's not going to turn a blind eye to that. I think that's the main reason why you don't see as much of the violence in Israel for that reason. But Muslims that come to faith, they can still be persecuted by their family, cast out of their community, so they can still receive some persecution. How many Muslim background believers there are in Israel? Maybe under 100. Honestly, I've noticed very, very few. Israel has one of the fewest numbers of Muslim background believers in all of the Middle East. There's a lot more in Saudi Arabia. There's more in Libya. There's a lot more in Tunisia, a lot more in Morocco. More Muslims in those places coming to faith than you'll see in Israel. Now, why is that the case? Some have talked about the political situation, that people's identity is even more important. Some have talked about how good of a lifestyle they have there, that they put their faith more in material things or money. All those could be possibilities. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that it's a rich harvest field there. Very few Muslims coming to faith. In the ministry that I've had in the Muslim villages, we haven't seen anybody come to faith in the 6 years that I've been doing that. And not even somebody that has been willing to go through the Bible once a week with us. That's kind of our next goal. So it definitely is hard ground that we'd appreciate your prayers for. The Arabs have a culture of hospitality, and that makes it easy to make relationships with them. Whenever we walk into an Arab village, we almost always meet people that we talk to. They invite us into their houses. They serve us coffee, tea, food. So it's easy to get to know them, and also to talk about spiritual things because they're in a very religious culture. But Islam is still a big barrier for sure. Just kind of on the Jewish side as well, this idea of your identity. And they believe in Jesus, but they believe he was just a man. They believe he was a very powerful prophet, but he was just a man. And in the Quran, there's verses where Jesus says that he's not God and talks about his mother Mary and that sort of thing. So they quote those as, Jesus said that he wasn't divine, and what the Christians are saying about him is not true. This sort of, anyway, so that is that type of background tradition that they have that keeps them as well from considering the biblical Jesus. Most are not knowledgeable about the Quran or go to the mosque on a daily basis, but they are proud to be Muslim. So they are still very proud to be Muslim, even if they don't read the Quran or go to the mosque even on Friday. So Friday is a big day of worship in the early afternoon. Where most of the men in the village would go to the mosque. Women usually stay home, but there is like a small section in the mosque for them that's usually run down and not kept up. It's a big pet peeve of my wife. So I want to talk about Hanan family story. So in Luke chapter 7, there's the story of Jesus going to a village called Nain and healing the widow's son from the dead. It's an amazing story. And the Catholic Church actually set up a church to that in the late 1800s in that village. And today, Nain is a Muslim village of about 2,000 people, two big families, two big extended families, no known believers in the town. We've been going there for years and years. And there's this one family, Hanan's family, that we've been following up with now for over 5 years. And so they know us very well. They're quite strong religious, and we get to know like their whole family. There'll be like 10, 15 people. The kids, the sister, or the brother-in-law, or whatever that come over, and they like to talk to us. And we've talked to them about Jesus, talked to them about the gospel, but there's never been any openness to actually consider, what it is that we believe. But the one thing we've always done for over 5 years is we pray with them at the end. We said we'd like to pray with you. And in Islam, you don't pray like that. It's a ritualistic thing you do in a mosque. It's kind of a set type of a thing. You just don't say, hey guys, let's pray. Well, that's just not something that's done. But we pray with them at the end. We pray for their family. We pray for their community. We pray for their health, for the grandma who has a bad leg, that sort of thing. And so over time, we begin to see how this was impacting them. And now when we go there, they're the ones that say, hey, we need to pray first before you leave. Or they'll tell their neighbors, hey, these people are praying for us. So again, it's sometimes the small beginnings of not necessarily believing what we believe, but they see a difference in us, and they like the prayers that we give. And sometimes these are the things that show the truth of what it is that we believe. What's the love that we show them? It's the way that we pray. And so this is just another example of the type of what the ministry is like there in this place, and oftentimes the victory stories that we see. So on the Arab Christian side, now this is a family that we've known since we got there. This is the Deeb family. So this is my former pastor there, Bishara, in the back, and then his wife Lubna, and these are their 3 girls. The one on the right is married now, has two kids now. I think she just gave birth, and then the other 2 live in Tel Aviv. So I mentioned the Arab Christian population is around 1.5% of the entire country and about 7% of the Arab population. So there's about 150,000 Christians in the country. This population may actually be shrinking due to immigration. A lot of Christians are still leaving the country to move to America, to Canada, to Australia, to Europe, to kind of get out of the political situation, to just be in a better place as far as they're concerned. The vast majority are from Greek Orthodox and Catholic background, and they've never heard the gospel. They believe Jesus died on the cross and rose again. They believe he's God. They believe a lot about Mary. She's still very important, but they don't know about what the gospel actually is. They have to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So there's perhaps around 5,000 Arab believers in Israel. The largest center is Nazareth, which has around 10 evangelical churches and a seminary. And evangelicals are a minority within a minority within a minority. And so they often feel societal pressure and powerlessness because of this, because it's such a small group of people. They often feel like maybe that makes them depend more on God. I think maybe that's part of it, but they're just a very small group of people. They're a minority even within the Arab Christian community. So it's kind of like they have no political power in the country or influence. And then the Baptist school in Nazareth, which is our daughter's going to go to in a couple years, has been a big source of evangelism, including among Muslims. So actually, I heard that 20% of the kids that go to the Baptist school are actually Muslims. And they hear the gospel all the time because they're required to go to chapel, required to take Bible classes. So that's been one of the, and also for people from the Greek Orthodox Catholic backgrounds, like my pastor I just showed you, my former pastor, he is from Greek Orthodox background. He got saved in the school. And then his wife, Lubna, was from Catholic background and got saved in the school too. So the Baptist school has been a huge source of evangelism in the community. So the story of the Deep family, I'll go back to their picture. So he started partnering with our team in 2011, and he became a full-time evangelist before I became a pastor. And he was totally on support, which in that society never happens, because it's like fully on support. Like, no, you need to have a job and work. But he said, in terms of my time, I know God wants me to invest my time fully in the evangelism work. And so he was able to actually raise the money he needed. Some was from America, some was from there. And just totally living on faith. And he became a full-time evangelist. Then he became a pastor of a church in Jaffa, the Jaffa part of Nazareth. And so when Jess and I came, we were a part of that church right away, and we were there for 9 years. And then he recently stepped down as a full-time pastor to focus just on the church planting work that they have in a Muslim village on the coast called, I'll leave the name out, but it's on the coast there. And they've seen a couple Muslims come to faith actually in that town, which has been great. But they're wonderful people, but a good example of just what it's like there. And then the lastly, we have the Arab Druze. So this is a very unique group. The guys you see in the front are the religious Druze. They've chosen to become religious. Then you see guys in the back who are not religious. That's why they're in more kind of secular garb. And so there's about 150,000 in the country. It's about the same number as the Christian population. And they're spread out over 21 villages in the northern part of Israel. And I've actually identified all 21 of these villages, been to a lot of them. The Druze religion, it's actually its own religion. Some people see it as like a Muslim sect. It's not. But it did come out of Islam in Egypt about 1,000 years ago. And the leaders of it, they mixed in Eastern ideas like reincarnation and other things like that with the religion. So they believe that as a Druze person, you're continuously reincarnated as a Druze person of the same gender until you reach, the ultimate spiritual state, and then you become one with the cosmic mind and you cease to exist, kind of like your own personality. And so that's the Muslims quickly rejected them as a heretical cult. And so they were quickly persecuted. And the Muslims tried to kill them. They now live where the convergence of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan are. And so that's why they're in the north of north of Israel, and also in the north of Jordan too. So they're a closed and secret religion. So nobody can enter the Druze religion. Soon after it was founded, they closed it. So nobody can enter, and nobody can leave. Or at least you're not supposed to leave. And most of the teachings, so if you only learn the teachings if you choose to become religious. So that's a choice that you have. And if you choose to become religious, then you can enter their place of worship and you can read their holy book. and you can learn actually what the tenets are, but the other Jewish population, they don't know about them at all. Like you can't even tell your kids so most of the Jews would know the main things, like the reincarnation thing and all that, but in terms of the individual, like doctrines and things like that, kind of rites, they wouldn't know that. And I meet some Jews that are secular, and they're like, yeah, if I become religious, then I can't do this and I can't do that, so I'm going to when I get really old, then I'll become religious. But for now, I kind of want to enjoy my life, so that's why I'm still secular, okay? So that's kind of the feeling that people have. And they also believe it's a secret religion. There's a lot in common with Gnosticism that we know about, that also Apostle John writes about, the issues that they face, that there are certain enlightened people that can understand certain things, or you have to do certain things to understand the secret teachings of this, So it's very similar in the Jewish religion, that there are actually only certain enlightened people that can understand the highest precepts, even among the religious population. So most Jews are not religious, they don't know their own religion. It seems more difficult to share Jesus with them, but some are coming to faith. And this guy Mike, I don't know what his real name is, but this guy Mike, our team actually did a short-term outreach with a Norwegian team that came doing evangelism, and they went to a Druze village, and they ended up meeting this Druze guy who ended up coming to faith. He became very passionate about Christ, and he's now led another Druze guy to faith. So, which is what we want to see, is multiplication. So when we see people come to faith, we want to teach them how to make disciples, right? Yeah. Because the first couple of years when somebody becomes a believer, their idea of what it means to be a follower of Jesus is really formed. And after that, it's actually difficult to change that in a lot of ways. And so we want to, from the very beginning, when they're learning about what it means to follow Jesus, is that actually making disciples is a key part of being a disciple. And that's what Jesus told his disciples, right? From the beginning, he said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Amen. So it wasn't just learning, it was, I'm going to teach you how to make disciples. And so to see multiplication happen, especially among the locals, that's what we try to do. And with Mike, we see that right away. He's like, yeah, I'm making disciples. I'm sharing my faith. A really passionate guy, not afraid. I mean, it's really amazing. So that's been a very encouraging story among a very least reached people group. So anyways, that's the end. Oh, okay, questions. So I know, so right now it's 9:35. And so that's the gist of my presentation, but I would like to